Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to the EduSite Network. Our topic of discussion today is the Iran-US nuclear agreement, and for this very discussion we have thus in our studio subject expert Dr. Rajan Kumar, Assistant Professor, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Thank you sir for coming.
Thank you Urvashi, and we are having a series of lectures on contemporary development that are taking place in the world. In the last lecture, we discussed about the Ukrainian crisis, and in today's lecture, we'll be talking about US-Iran agreement that has taken place very recently. If you remember, Iran signed a deal with the United States on the nuclear issues, and that was a very important agreement. That is considered to be a very important agreement in international politics, partly because Iran and United States were the two opposite sides in international politics, and at one point of time George Bush said that Iran is one of the rogue states, and the axis of evils. So with that period, with that kind of understanding, now Iran has signed a deal with the United States on the nuclear issues, and it was signed on 31st of March this year. And that deal is considered to be very important in international politics, partly because two of the most important countries they have signed the deal, and who are extremely on the two extreme sides. So what I'll do today is that I'll discuss about the deal, what are the various features of the deal, why the timing of this deal is important. I'll also discuss about Iran's nuclear program, the way Iran has been trying to develop nuclear reactors in the last 10 years or so. And then I'll also come to I'll show you the places where the nuclear reactors of Iran are located. Then I'll come to India. I'll discuss about the India-Iran relationship in the last few years, and the way the sanctions which were imposed by the Western country, how that also impacted Iran-India relationship in the last 2-3 years. And finally, I'll also discuss about some of the impacts of sanctions which were imposed by Iran, which were imposed by the Western countries on Iran, and the way it impacted not only Iran but the economy of the region as a whole. So in that framework, I'll discuss the Iran-US nuclear deal today. So I'll start with the main issue. So what is the main issue between United States and Iran? The main issue, as you might be knowing, is basically how to stop Iran from making the nuclear bomb. As you know that any country which can develop nuclear reactors, any country which has the capacity to develop, to have heavy water reactors or the centrifuges, so those countries are in very close, they can easily make a nuclear bomb also. So the main issue here is that how to stop Iran from developing a nuclear bomb. Iran has been arguing that that the nuclear reactors are meant for peaceful purposes, energy purposes, or the medicinal purposes, and then Iran never accepted that Iran is planning to make a nuclear bomb. Partly because Iran is also a signatory of a non-proliferation regime, NPT, although the Western countries have been claiming that Iran has violated many of the NPT regimes. There is a charge of non-compliance by Iran. Iran has signed the CTBT, but Iran has not ratified the CTBT. So we'll discuss about that gradually, but the main issue, as I told you, is that the main issue for the Western country was how to stop Iran from making the nuclear bomb. So for that, the Western countries have been trying to strike a deal with Iran for the last 10 years. In fact, the deal started in 2003. And it took a pace in 2006, and after that, as you know, that sanctions were imposed by the European countries, by the European Union, United States, United Nations, Japan. Partly India was also, because they imposed sanctions on many of the companies, so India also suffered because of that. So now, for the last 2 years, they have been negotiating on how to make Iran a nuclear responsible country, which means that Iran would be using nuclear reactors or the heavy water reactors for the peaceful purposes, and Iran will not make nuclear bomb. So that is the main issue here. And the countries which have been negotiating with Iran, the main, which is known as P5+1, P5 refers to the permanent member of the Security Council, United Nations Security Council, United States, United Kingdom, France, France, China and Russia. So these are the P5 countries. So they have been negotiating with Iran, and another country which is also a part of the deal, part of the negotiation, that is Germany. So that's the reason it's called P5+1. So it means Germany. Earlier, there were other countries which were very active in facilitating the process of negotiation, and those countries were Brazil and Turkey. So they facilitated the deal with Iran in the earlier period, but later on, the deal that has been going on since 2013. First, the interim deal was signed in 2013 in Geneva, and now the latest deal was signed in a place called Lausanne, which is in Switzerland, and there they finally came to a very to what is known as the comprehensive agreement on nuclear issues between Iran and the United States, and Iran and the P5 countries. This is known as comprehensive agreement which was signed just March of this year, March 31st. There was a deadline, and the deadline was set up by the previous interim deal which took place in 2013. So in that it was agreed that they have to come to an agreement, they have to come to a comprehensive agreement by the deadline. Deadlines was set up as March 31st of this year, 2015. And finally, there is a provision in this deal that finally this deal has to be ratified by the US Congress, and this deal also has to be ratified by Iranian Parliament. So now this bill has to be, the President of the United States, Barack Obama, has to get it passed in the Congress of United States, and if that is not passed by the Congress, then the deal will fall, and Iran will again Iran would be back to the square one from where the negotiation started. But you know, President Obama and President Obama is trying very hard to get it passed through the US Congress, and it's likely, it's being believed that probably because the credibility of the entire US administration is at stake, and as a result, it's very likely that US is going to get this bill passed. But finally, the date is by June 2015. So the Clinton administration has time to lobby with the Republican members, many of whom are opposed to this deal in the US Congress. Now the moral question which comes to my mind, and which might also be coming to your mind, the moral question, which is although not very important in international politics, but again that does not stop us from asking this question. The moral question which comes to my mind is that why is it that the P5 countries, or the permanent 5 members, why P5 countries are allowed to make nuclear bombs and why other countries are not allowed to make the nuclear bombs? The same kind of discussion was taking place when India was signing the famous civil nuclear deal in 2005 during the Manmohan Singh UPA government. So when India was 2005 till 2008, the final deal. So when India was signing, the same kind of argument was being given, but the United States argued that India has been a responsible country in terms of nuclear power, because India does not have the record of any proliferation, unlike Pakistan and some of the other countries, and also India was not the signatory of the CTBT, and CTBT means Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. I'll come to that in later discussion later. But India was not the signatory of CTBT. India also did not sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is known as the NPT. And India has been a very responsible nuclear country. So India's record is very good in terms of its nuclear policies, or the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. So India was given waiver by the nuclear supply group, and India was also allowed to trade in uranium and other products with the other countries. The waiver which was given by the famous Indo-US civil nuclear deal, which was signed during the Manmohan Singh's government. So even that time, with the discussion, and if you remember the discussion taking place during that period of time, discussion was that why the United States and those countries, P5 countries, are allowed to trade in, they are allowed to make the bomb, they are allowed to trade in nuclear weapons, but why is it that India and other countries are not allowed to develop nuclear weapons? The same question is being asked by Iran and other countries like Israel and Pakistan and other countries which have the nuclear capabilities, but who cannot trade who cannot trade in the nuclear weapons, and who cannot, and there is a certain kind of restriction on testing the nuclear bomb also. So this reflects the broader geopolitical reality of today's world. In today's world, the most important country, as you know, the most important country is United States, and the broader international regime that we have it today, that is dominated by the Western countries, United States leading the camp, leading the bloc, and that is followed by France, Germany, Japan, etc. So they have created a system where they think that they have the policy that they can develop the nuclear weapons, but they do not allow other countries to either develop the nuclear weapons or trade in the nuclear weapons. So that shows a kind of nuclear apartheid, where some of the countries are allowed to have the nuclear weapons and other countries cannot have it, and that is something which is hypocritical. Jawaharlal Nehru, when he argued in 1950s for the banning of the nuclear weapons, nuclear bombs, and he argued that the nuclear weapons should be eliminated by all the countries. The countries that time, there were only two countries which had the nuclear bomb. One was United States, and the second was Soviet Union. So Jawaharlal Nehru argued for complete elimination of nuclear weapons. But as you know that later on the policy of India changed, because India could not persuade, or India could not pressurize these countries to eliminate the nuclear weapons. As a result, India decided to have its own nuclear bomb. India, in fact, tested the first nuclear explosion, Smiling Buddha, that took place in 1974. As you know, during Indira Gandhi's regime. The second test again took place in 1998 when Atal Bihari Vajpayee of NDA was Prime Minister. Earlier, some of the other Prime Ministers of India, they also tried to test the nuclear weapons, but because of the US pressure, when the information was leaked, and because of the US pressure, India did not test it. So India's position, what I am trying to compare here, what I am trying to convey you is that there is a kind of hypocrisy in the international politics, where some of the countries are allowed to have the bomb and other countries are not allowed to have the bomb. This is not to argue the case that Iran should have the nuclear bomb. That's not the case. In fact, Iran's record on human rights, Iran's record on this proliferation, that is being questioned by many of the experts, and as a result, Iran's track record is at times is questionable. But the point is that why some countries are allowed to have the bomb and allowed to test the nuclear weapons, allowed to test develop reactors for peaceful purposes. But when other countries try to develop it, suspicion comes in the Western countries that and they will not allow this regime to change, or this rather hegemony of these P5 countries to be challenged by any other state. So that is the main question that you need to ponder over, and you should understand how the real politics in globe is conducted, the way some of the countries dominate the entire nuclear regime in today's world. In the case of nuclear technology and nuclear bomb, let me clarify that today, if I have to tell you that which are the countries which have the nuclear bombs, US, Russia, China, United Kingdom, France, India and Pakistan, these are the countries which have declared the policy of having the nuclear bombs. India and Pakistan were the recent ones. They declared up to 1998, India declared up to 1998, and that was followed by Pakistan. It is believed by the expert that North Korea and Israel also have the nuclear bombs, but they have not declared it openly. But they have the technology at least. Japan and Germany, it is argued that probably Japan and Germany, these are the two countries which were defeated during the World War II, but the nuclear reactors are very advanced there, and they can make the bomb at any point of time. But because of the regime which developed after the World War II period, so they were not allowed to develop nuclear weapons. Now there is a talk in Japan that Japan, because of the threat which is coming from North Korea, and also the threat to Japanese security, which is emanating from China. So because of these two factors, Japan is also now arguing, some of the nationalist leaders in Japan or the people in Japan, they argue that Japan should also be allowed to develop the nuclear bomb so that it can counter the so-called Chinese bomb or the Chinese nuclear threat, which it considers very severe for the survival of the state. Now, the nuclear regimes that you have, for instance, NPT, CTBT, or the Nuclear Supply Group. So, in that CTBT, Iran has signed the CTBT, but Iran did not ratify. The Iranian parliament did not ratify the CTBT. CTBT, as you know, the CTBT was initiated, that program of comprehensive test ban treaty. So that was initiated by the Clinton presidency, and he promoted this idea of a comprehensive ban where the bomb cannot be tested either underground or in the atmosphere or in the waters or in the oceans. So that is the comprehensive ban that you cannot, any country, any signatory, the country which has signed the nuclear treaty, the CTBT, that country will not be allowed to have, not be allowed to test the nuclear bombs either in the atmosphere or underground or in the water. So that's the whole idea. Iran signed it, but Iran did not ratify it. The parliament of Iran did not ratify it. About the NPT, non-proliferation regime that you have, or nuclear non-proliferation treaty, and the NPT, the acronym. So NPT is again a regime which seeks to control the proliferation of the nuclear weapons, because nuclear weapons are considered to be very deadly, and many of the states fear, the powerful states including India and the Western countries, they fear that the regimes which are or the states which are not responsible, in those states there is a threat that even the terrorist can acquire the nuclear weapon, and that might pose a real threat to the humanity. So they argued, these states argued that the states which are not responsible, they should not be allowed to have these nuclear weapons, especially the states which have been responsible for sponsoring terrorism in one manner or the other. So those states should not be allowed to trade in the nuclear weapons, because that can pose a real threat to the international order. That can also pose a real threat to the region and the humanity as a whole. So Iran has signed and ratified the NPT, but there has been complaints against Iran that Iran has not been seriously following the rules and regulations which were part of this NPT. So there's a complaint of non-compliance by Iran, even though Iran is a signatory. As I told you, India is not a signatory of NPT or the CTBT, but Iran is a signatory of NPT, which means that Iran should not be trading in these products, uranium or the other products, nuclear weapons, either with any of the countries, practically with any of the countries in the world. But then there were charges that it was trying to develop nuclear technology clandestinely with the help of Pakistan. And also there are some charges that Iran is trying to have very close cooperation with Russia, and also to an extent with China. So these are some of the charges which were made against Iran in terms of non-compliance of proliferation NPT. The United Nations Security Council passed a resolution 1696. That's the number of 1696 is the number of that particular resolution. It was signed in 2006, which demanded suspension of a nuclear enrichment program being done by Iran. So probably after the report, it was reported by the International Atomic Energy Agency that Iran is secretly, stealthily trying to develop nuclear weapons. And after that report, United Nations Security Council passed a resolution 1696, which asked Iran to roll back the nuclear enrichment program within a month. And if Iran did not do that, that would be followed by some sanctions. And that's what happened finally, that Iran initially did not roll back the the nuclear enrichment program, and which led to the sanctions by various multilateral organizations, and also various individual countries, including United States and the European Union countries, and also Japan and Canada and other states. Now I would like you to there are certain locations. I would like to show you some of the locations of Iran's nuclear reactors. If you see on the top, there is one, this Bonab Ramsar, the two reactors which Iran claims that is a civilian nuclear research reactor. There is another research reactor in Tehran. There is another reactor at Natanz, this uranium enrichment complex. All the dark red one that you see, they are the existing reactors of Iran. And then there is a heavy water production reactor in Arak, and that's in the western side of Iran. Then there is another one which is coming up, which is under construction, which is known as Isfahan. That's that reactor. And there is a Bushehr, which has the capacity of 1000 megawatt reactor. And there are two other reactors which are planned at Ahwaz with the capacity of 1000 megawatt reactors. So if you see the spread of nuclear reactors in Iran, so they are pretty well spread out, and they are in all parts of Iran, and these are the reactors which were sanctioned, and the companies involved or the people involved or the regime, they are the ones who were sanctioned, apart from the other sanctions that I will discuss in today's lecture. So these are the places where the Iranian nuclear reactors are located, and this I have taken from one of the websites. So credit must go to the website. This picture is not my creation. This has been taken from one of the websites, and the small font that you see basically tells you the place where I have taken this map from. So next is the after this, what is the nuclear deal that is in discussion? What are the various details? Because the devil lies in details. So what are the details which are there of the US-Iran nuclear deal? And the first is that Iran, this is all about the way the Western countries, they wanted to control the enrichment capacity of Iran, and as a result they promised that if Iran decides to reduce the enrichment capacity, so after that the sanctions would be lifted by the Western countries, and the sanctions would be lifted in phases. So it's not that Iran is going to be free of sanctions, all sanctions altogether, but Iran would be lifted. The sanctions would be lifted from Iran if Iran decides to reduce the enrichment capacity, and if Iranian reactors are made accessible to IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency. And so for that, Western Iran, they developed, they signed, and they have to develop the comprehensive accord, which is to be ratified by June 30th, 2015. So practically after 2 months. Now, what are the details of the deal? The first important detail of the deal is that Iran is supposed to reduce the installed centrifuges used for enrichment by 2/3 of its capacity. So you know that centrifuges is one of the techniques through which the enrichment of uranium is done. So in the deal, this negotiation, and there is a clause in this framework agreement between the two groups, where it says that Iran will reduce the centrifuges, the existing operational centrifuges, by 2/3. So Iran has nearly 10,000 operational centrifuges at the moment. Operational, I'm saying operational centrifuges, and I'll show you the picture of centrifuges, so that will give you an idea that what I mean by centrifuges. And it's like cylindrical kind of cylindrical object where it rotates, and that leads to enrichment of uranium from where the U-235 isotopes are acquired, which is used for making the nuclear bomb. I'll also show you the technique, the way it's made briefly. The second part of the agreement is that it will reduce the stockpile of low enriched uranium from 10,000 to 3,000 kilograms. So that's an important aspect of the deal. It says that Iran will reduce the stockpile of low enriched uranium from 10,000 kilograms to 300 kilograms, and additionally Iran will also redesign the nuclear facility at Fordo. So it will redesign the facility because the Western countries fear that with the present centrifuges and present technology, Iran is in position to quickly accumulate the enriched uranium. So as a result, Iran agreed, or Iran has to agree in this deal, that it will redesign the nuclear facility through which through which the breakout period of making the bomb, that can be delayed even if Iran decides to back out of the deal. So again, it was also agreed by the two sides, the centrifuges in Iran which are not operational, so they would be monitored by IAEA. Iran has 10,000 operational, as I told you, but it is argued that in total Iran might be having nearly 19,000 centrifuges. So out of the 9,000 or that number which are not operational, which are not functional, even they will come under the surveillance of or they'll be monitored by IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, just to ensure that Iran is not trying to make bomb through its centrifuges. All Iran's nuclear reactors, they will come under the inspection of IAEA inspectors, and they will have free access to all the reactors in Iran. So that is another part of the deal. Iran has also been asked to redesign its heavy water reactor at Arak. Through heavy water, there are two techniques through which make the bomb. One is through the enriched uranium U-235 isotopes, which is acquired through the centrifuges techniques. And the second one is with the heavy water reactors, you have the spent fuel, and that spent fuel contains plutonium, and plutonium can also be used to make bombs. So now there is an agreement that Iran will redesign the heavy water reactors at Arak, so that the plutonium which can be produced from the heavy water reactor at Arak, so they can be kept in check. So that is the second part of the negotiation, where Iran will redesign its heavy water reactor at Arak. And I showed you the picture where Arak is located in Iran, is on the western side of Iran. So once that is being done, once that is done by Iran, once these regulations are implemented by Iran, the US and European Union, they'll start lifting the sanctions in phases. So they'll gradually start lifting the sanctions. So that is these are the main provisions of Iran-US nuclear deal. Now the picture shows you the cylindrical steel that you can see there in the picture, and so these are the centrifuges, and these centrifuges rotate, and the uranium gas through the circulation, the fast circulation of the gas, this uranium U-235 isotopes are created, which is used for the making of the nuclear bomb. In picture you see the Iranian president, the previous ex-president of Iran, Ahmadinejad, and he is having a look at those nuclear reactors. So these pictures are there on the internet. It shows how Iran is trying to develop nuclear reactors, or Iran is trying to enrich uranium through centrifuges. So that is an interesting picture. I thought I should share with you, because that gives you an idea that how centrifuges look like, and how this enrichment of uranium takes place in a reactor. And just briefly, there are two ways to make nuclear bomb. One is that you need enriched uranium, or you need plutonium. So highly enriched uranium can be obtained by separating U-235 isotopes. By separating U-235 isotopes from the regular uranium through centrifuges. In the regular uranium, the U-235 isotopes is very low in quantity, it's just 1% or something like that. So it has to be done that has to be U-235 isotopes. They have to be acquired through this process of centrifuges. The second is through the heavy water reactors, as I mentioned earlier. So heavy water reactors produce a spent fuel containing plutonium, which can be used for nuclear bombs. And Arak, in that Iran, as I told you, is using that that has the capacity to produce that plutonium. So that reactor is again to be kept in surveillance. The IAEA inspectors will keep an eye on this particular heavy water reactor. And this again, the figure, as I told you, that Iran has 10,000 centrifuges and 9,000 are non-operational ones. Now, when the deal was signed, then what was the global reaction? That is, for a student of international politics, it is very important that we understand that what was the reaction of the global community in terms of when the deal was signed. The first reaction came from United States, and this is very interesting that in 2002 George Bush said that Iran is a part of axis of evils. The countries like Libya, Cuba, Korea, these are the considered these were the countries which are considered evils by the US administration or the US policymakers. But as you can see that this is a statement of Obama, where Obama made a statement after the deal that there's a kind of a historical understanding between US and Iran when they signed the deal, this famous US-Iran framework agreement on nuclear program. So Obama was very positive, and Obama probably felt that this deal will play a very important role in creating a bridge between Iran and United States. But the same kind of optimism is not shared by many of the Republican members in the US Congress, and the US Congress is divided over the deal. Many of the US Republican members in the Congress, they feel that this will empower Iran. This will also give a kind of since there is no complete ban on nuclear reactors, so Iran can back out from this deal at any one point of time, and as a result Iran will acquire the capability to develop the nuclear weapons. They also fear that this will change the geopolitics in the region, where this Iran can emerge as a powerful country which might threaten the survival of Israel, because Israel is the only country in the Middle East or in West Asia, that's the only country which has the nuclear weapon, or which has the nuclear technology or nuclear weapon. But if Iran acquires the technology, so that can completely challenge the geopolitics of the West Asian region. As a result, Israel was vehemently opposing the deal. In fact, just when the deal was about to be signed, the election took place in Israel, and in the election again the hawkish Prime Minister Netanyahu, he became the Prime Minister of Israel again, and he visited just before the deal. He visited United States, and he tried to lobby the Republican leaders and also some of the other leaders, where he argued that this deal is not in the interest of the entire region, and this deal will completely jeopardize the security of the entire West Asian region. So Netanyahu said this deal will threaten the survival of Israel, and he got a very positive response from many of the Republican members, and that's the reason there's a fear that when the deal goes to the Congress, many of the Republican members might actually oppose the deal. But the Democrats are lobbying very hard to get this deal through the US Congress. Saudi Arabia was very critical of the deal, and it's not very difficult to understand why Saudi Arabia was critical of the deal, because Saudi Arabia also considers itself as one of the leaders in the region. There are a few leaders in the West Asian region, and the so-called proclaimed leaders or the leading countries of the region are, one is this Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, as you know, because of the resources that it has, primarily the hydrocarbon resources that it has. So because of that, is one of the richest country in the world in the region. So Saudi Arabia is a Sunni country, and on the other hand, Iran, as you know, Iran is a Shia country. So and as a result, there is always a tussle between Saudi Arabia and Iran over the issue of leadership, that who is the leader of the region. So since West Asia has both the communities in large numbers, the Sunni community and the Shia community. So as a result, there is always a tussle for the leadership, and as you see that what is happening in West Asia today, that also is partly a conflict between Shia and Sunni. In Iran, the Shia leadership is there. In Iraq, after the election, the Shia leadership has come to power, and ISIS in Iraq, which is fighting against the regime. So they are the Sunni, and they are the Sunni followers, Sunni Islam. They follow the Sunni Islam. And Turkey, there is another country again which is Sunni country. Turkey also considers itself as the leader of West Asia. So and on the other hand, you have Israel. Israel is another country which consider itself, the leader because of the technology that it has, because of the military that it has, also because of the support that it gets from the United States and the other Western European countries. So there are 4 poles in the region: Iran, Saudi Arabia, Israel and Turkey, and all of them play a role in maintaining the balance in the region. At the moment, the Sunni Islam is under threat because in Iraq, the Shia regime has come to power, although there is a coalitional government and the Sunni members are also there. In Syria, the Shia leadership is there. In Yemen, the Shia people are fighting against the Sunni regime there, and ISIS has completely changed the stability of West Asia, because it claims that Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. So ISIS that is challenging the broader stability of the region. Iran is completely against ISIS, and Iran being a Shia country, it fears that the growing influence of ISIS in the region might pose a real threat to the security in the region. And there is a conflict in Yemen, and the Yemenese government is being supported by Saudi Arabia. In fact, Saudi Arabia started bombing in Yemen in support of the Yemenese government there, and that Iran vehemently opposed that kind of the aerial attack by Saudi Arabia. So that is the broader geopolitics that you have in that region. As a result, Saudi Arabia was against any kind of the reproma which might emerge between Iran and United States. Similarly, Israel also felt that the growing bridge between Iran and Israel was not good for Israel, because what is happening in today's politics, that Israel is also getting distant from United States at the moment. When Netanyahu, the leadership, the prime minister there, he was not very well received by Obama administration, and Obama publicly rebuked Netanyahu in some of the speeches. So as a result, Netanyahu government was not completely backed by the Democrats, the Democrats in the U.S. Congress, and they asked Israel to negotiate with Palestine. They also asked Israel to negotiate with other countries in the region, but that is something that Israel is not willing to do. As a result, what we see is that there is a growing rift between Netanyahu and the U.S. leadership. So this deal further that created the gulf between Israeli leadership and the American leadership. So that is something which has emerged out of this. Although please understand that US is too close to Israel, and it's very difficult for the United States not to support Israel, because Israel is one country through which United States control the entire region, entire West Asian region, and US will not allow to have a situation where Israel goes completely out of hand from United States. And Israel also cannot survive in West Asia without the explicit and implicit support from countries like United States and the Western European states. So that's the broader geopolitics in the region. Russia was forthcoming in accepting this deal. Russia said that this deal is basically the recognition of the peaceful development of nuclear energy by Iran. So Russia welcomed this deal, and Russia was supporting this deal also. China, on the other hand, China also supported this deal. China has been supporting Iran earlier also when it came to some of the sanctions and other things. So China was not in favor of voting with the Western countries on the IAEA, the regulations which took place sometime earlier, I think 2005 or 6. For Pakistan it was a difficult situation, because Iran is a neighbor of Pakistan. On the western side, Iran has a border with Pakistan. Iran has a huge border with Pakistan, and so the possibility of a Shia country developing a nuclear weapon, that was not acceptable to Pakistan, because that might threaten the security of Pakistan at some point of time. And there have been issues where the Iranian interests have actually come in conflict with Pakistan. In Pakistan, there is a huge Shia population, and it is believed that Shia population in Pakistan is not being given the kind of rights and privileges that a minority should have in a democratic state. So as a result, the Shias in Pakistan, they are supported by Iran. So that creates a conflict on the one hand. On the other hand, on the issue of Afghanistan, Iran again was supporting the Northern Alliance during the earlier period, while Pakistan was supporting the Taliban. So as a result, they came into direct confrontation with each other. So these are the two reasons why Pakistan was not very happy with this deal. In fact, there is a third factor that being a Sunni country, Pakistan is very close to Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia would at some point of time, because Iran now has the nuclear reactor, so Saudi Arabia would also like to develop the nuclear program so that it can have the nuclear weapon, and Saudi Arabia believes that probably that can be done if Pakistan provides the nuclear technology and the necessary equipments for developing the reactors in Saudi Arabia. So because Pakistan is close to Saudi Arabia, so that also created a kind of difficult situation for Pakistan, and Pakistan was not very happy because Saudi Arabia and Iran are in conflict with each other. So that is the broader geopolitics of the region, and that was the global response of these countries in the region. Now broadly, it's very important because we are talking about US and Iran. So I'll also briefly give you a background of the way US-Iran relationship developed in the last 60 years or so. The first came in 1950s when secular leader Mossadegh, he was overthrown by CIA, the American secret agency, and the British secret agency. So he was the one who was first overthrown by these American and the British agency, and he was the democratically elected secular leader, but he was replaced by because of the coup which was done with the help of CIA and the British. So there the influence of US and the Britain continued for a long time in Iran, but in 1979 revolution, the Iranian Revolution, the term known as Iranian Revolution, this is more like Islamic Revolution, where this very conservative Islamic regime came to power in 1979, where Shah of Iran, Mohammad Raja Pahlavi, he was forced to leave Iran, and after the protest took place, and he was forced to leave Iran, and Pahlavi was supported by the United States. So the revolution that took place, that basically cut down the power of the United States, and after that Ayatollah Khomeini, he came to Iran, and he established the Islamic Republic of Iran. So what you see is the growing role of the religion and Islam in the state after this revolution. And after that, there was a famous U.S. embassy hostage crisis in 1979, when the U.S. embassy was was taken hostage by some of the students of Iran, the very radical Islamic students of Iran. There were 52 hostages, and they were kept in hostage for 444 days, so more than a year. So they were in hostage. So that created a kind of rift between US and Iran. We also have the now evidence of Iran-Contra scandal, where US gave weapons to Iran for its help in freeing Lebanese hostages, and finally the profit went to the rebels in Nicaragua. And this exposed the hypocrisy of the United States, that the way it was supporting the regime change in various places, and the way it was also negotiating with Iran, which was otherwise a kind of untouchable state for the United States. And then Iran's passenger plane was shot down by the United States in 1988. In the previous lecture, we heard that this MS-17 was shot down by the so-called Ukrainian rebels in July 2014, last year. Here, the Iranian passenger plane was shot down in 1988. And from 1997 to 2005, Mohammad Khatami was the president. And after that, in 2002, George Bush pronounces Iran as the axis of evils. From 2005 to 13, Ahmadinejad became the president. And after that, President Hassan Rouhani, he came to power, and he is being projected as a very liberal and moderate kind of person. Not liberal in terms of the Western liberalism, but he is in compared to the previous regimes, Rouhani is considered to be moderate. And in one of the statements, he said that although the nuclear weapons or the nuclear reactors are important, but the survival of a state is also important. So for that you need to have negotiation with United States and other countries. So he has started giving priority to negotiations, and he actually talked on phone to Obama and John Kerry, and he started encouraging negotiations which will allow Iran to have a normal trade and economic relations with the Western European, and other countries, including United States. So he is the one who is in power at the moment, Hassan Rouhani. And now I'll come to the sanctions which were imposed on Iran by the Western countries and United States. So the sanction was on the ban on heavy weaponry and nuclear technology. Iran was also banned from arms export. Neither it could export nor it could import from the other countries, and the ban also was on some of the assets were frozen, assets of the key individuals, the military rulers, military leaders, and the key political leaders. Their assets were frozen, which means some of the assets that they had in the Western countries or the Western banks, so they could not operate with the Western banks. There was a ban on Iranian bank and financial institutions. So that ban created a lot of problem for Iranian banks, because they cannot, that financial transactions which used to take place through these banks, now they were not allowed to operate in the Western institution, or the Western banks were not allowed to have a normal relations with these banks. So that created a huge problem in Iran, and there was a ban on Iranian oil and gas also, and Iran was not allowed to export Iranian oil and gas to European countries, and Europe was one of the major importers of Iranian gas and oil. So, and the institutions which banned were United Nations, European Union, and of course some of the individual countries. US ban was very harsh, because US has banned all the trade with Iran except some of the the trade which will benefit directly the people of Iran, or which were for the humanitarian purposes like medicines, drugs, and some of the agricultural items. So except that, Iran had a blanket ban on all kind of trade with Iran. And after that, what we see is that the interim deal was signed in Geneva in 2013, and after that a relief of $7 billion was given to Iran on the promise of cutting down the nuclear uranium enrichment program by Iran. An additional $4.2 billion was also given by as a restricted fund to Iran in return for the promises of Iran to cut down the nuclear enrichment program. But if I tell you the real impact of sanctions on Iran, it was very high. It was very high in terms of economic impact, and it is believed that every month the sanction cost Iran nearly $4 to $8 billion every month. So that was a huge cost that Iran had to face, and Iran suffered a loss of nearly $26 billion just because of the restrictions on oil export from Iran in just 1 year, which is 2012. Iran's GDP shrank by 1.9% in 2012 and 1.3% in 2013. So that is a huge impact that Iran had because of the sanction. Rial, the currency of Iran, that suffered nearly 2.3% of its, that lost two-thirds of its value against dollar, and inflation rose to nearly 40%. And that is one of the reasons why Iran came to the negotiating table. And Iran, as the statement said, Rouhani said that it's good for the centrifuges to operate, but it's also important for the country to operate. So he basically saying that how nuclear reactors are important, but more than that, the country's economy has to operate. And the timing also, why the timing was important. This is important. Why the West and Iran came to the negotiating table and they signed the deal. West had little choice but to negotiate, for the simple reason that what are the options for the Western countries? One option was to attack Iran as they did in Iraq. But as you know that the Iraq as a state has failed now, and they realize that the attacking a country it creates a further instability, and it never led to stability in the country. So as a result, and Iran is a powerful country, it was very difficult to attack a country like Iran. That would have created a huge mess in the entire region. Attacking was not the option. It was realized by the Western countries. And what is happening in the West Asia, as I told you, that in Syria, Iraq and Yemen you have a crisis. In Syria, the regime was initially attacked by the Western countries. They wanted to change the regime there, but that did not succeed. In Iraq, IS has come to has become very powerful force, and IS is trying to change the regime in Iraq, and Iraq is almost an unstable state. Iraq is on the verge of Iraq is facing the civil war, and it's likely that Iraq will not survive as a state in future. So they realize that and it's very important for the Western country. They realize that Iran is a very important country, because the one country which is willing to fight against the Sunni Islam, which is being represented by ISIS. So Iran can play a very important role in supporting the regimes of Iraq, which will fight against ISIS, and it will also support. It can also stabilize the Syrian regime at the moment. So Iran's role was considered very important in negotiation, or also in maintaining the balance in West Asia and resolving some of the issues. And that's the reason West appeared to be very interested in negotiating with Iran. And they felt that if the negotiation does not take place, it's very likely that Iran will develop nuclear weapons, and in that case the war remains the only option. War between Iran and the Western countries, that remains the only option. To avoid that kind of situation, the Western countries, they decided to negotiate with Iran as a better policy than going for a war. And Iran's influence, what is likely to happen that after this deal, that Iran's influence is likely to grow in Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen and Syria, because Iran is going to be a powerful state now because of the economic revival, and also because of the regimes which are there in Iraq, regimes which are there in Syria, and also the Yemenis conflict, civil war, where Shia forces are fighting against the Sunni rebels there, Sunni regime there. The US Secretary of State John Kerry, this is the picture that I wanted to show you. These are the two leaders. One is John Kerry, who is the US Secretary of State. He was negotiating from the US side, and from the Iranian side, the Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Zarif, he was negotiating. So these were the two important figures, and don't be surprised if these two figures are nominated for Nobel Prize in the coming year. So now briefly, I'll also touch upon India-Iran relationship. India had a very good relationship with Iran in the historical period. Jawaharlal Nehru visited there, and he had a good relationship because we were importing a lot of oil from Iran. And during Iran-Iraq war, though the relationship suffered because India was getting closer to Iraq, and that created some kind of tension between the two states. India also developed good relation with Iran in 1990 in supporting Northern Alliance in Afghanistan. Please remember that Iran was, before the ban, before the sanction, was the second largest supplier of crude oil to India. And we import oil from this West Asian states, Saudi Arabia, Iran and other countries, Kuwait, etc. So Iran is very important for our hydrocarbon resources. India again in 2005, when it came to voting in IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, India voted against Iran, and that was not taken very lightly by Iranian, because Iranian considered India as a very friendly state. In fact, in one of the surveys, it is said that 70% of people in Iran are very favorable to India. They want more positive role of India in Iran, and this is one of the highest in any country for the other country. In 2001, oil trade between the two states were nearly $12 billion, but this was halted due to sanctions on banking system, where the payment became an issue where India could not pay through the Iranian bank or through the institutions. Also because please remember that in India we have a huge Shia population, and Lucknow is considered the capital of Uttar Pradesh. That is considered to be one of the capital of Shia Muslims in India. So because of that, also because of the historical reasons, I'm not going into history, but India has a very good historical relationship with Iran over the years, right since the early medieval Delhi Sultanate and the Mughal period and the later ones. So that relationship continued, but over the time, because of some of the issues, India, there are some rift also that emerged between India and Iran. During the sanction, India also tried to come closer, where India was developing a port which is known as Chabahar port, which is on the Chabahar port is important for India because that provides a link to India, to Central Asia, and also to Afghanistan. And India has also built a road between Afghanistan and Chabahar port. That's nearly 220 kilometers, and from where India will get direct access to Afghanistan. And there is a talk of you might have heard the talk of North-South corridor, where Mumbai is supposedly Mumbai will be linked to St. Petersburg in Russia, and the link would be something like that. That there will be shipment of products from Mumbai to Chabahar port in Iran, and from there through the road and the railways, the products would be taken to Central Asian states and also to Russia and to other European countries. So that is the kind of the road which is being projected or which is being planned by India to access in Europe. And Narasimha Rao visited Tehran in 1993, then Vajpayee also visited in 2001, Khatami, the president of Iran, came in 2003, and Ahmadinejad also came in 2008. India-Iran trade in 2011 was nearly $13.4 billion. India exports rice, machinery, drugs, metals, tea, etc. to Iran, and the major import for India, as you know, is the oil product, petrochemical products from Iran. There are nearly 8,000 Iranian students in India in various universities, primarily Bangalore and Pune, but also in Delhi. And India provides 67 scholarships to students from Iran. India also now, what is the impact of the deal on India? So this will allow India to import oil from Iran. India will face, but it's also likely that India will face more competition from China and Japan, because these are the countries which are going to invest heavily now in Iran, and India is likely to face competition from these two countries. India also seeks to maintain a close relations with Israel and Saudi Arabia. So there will be a tightrope walk for India, where India has to balance Israel and Saudi Arabia on the one hand, and India will have to balance Iran on the other. So that is the second thing that India has to keep in mind to understand the geopolitics of that region. But also there is a talk of Iran and India gas pipeline, which was during the previous UPA government, that did not succeed because of the sanctions on Iran. But again, that talk can be reinitiated by the present government. So these were some of the issues that I wanted to bring to you for discussion, and I think with this I'll come to the conclusion with just two brief conclusion points. One is that Iran's influence is going to grow in the region. That's number one. The oil price, which is very important for India, the oil price may likely come down when there is a free flow of oil from Iran to other countries. So although already the price of oil is has come down to nearly 40%, although now it's rising again, but that would be a very positive impact, not just for India but also for other countries. So India has to play a very important role in Iran in case it has to play a role in West Asia. With this, I come to the conclusion of my presentation. I hope you liked it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, and I'm sure the students greatly liked it and they would be learning a great deal from it. So friends, as sir already suggested, that this is part of our series when we talk about the contemporary developments in the world. So yesterday there was a lecture on the crisis in Ukraine, and today was the Iran-US nuclear agreement, where our subject expert talked about the deal, its features, also amongst many things, the impact of the deal on India and the India-Iran relations. So friends, we have more to follow as part of this series, but as of now, this was for today. So we would like to sign out, but before that, we must thank sir for being here today. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, friends. Have a great day.